China is heading down the path of war, and this path leads to the Far East and Siberia. Did Trump consciously or as always turn Russia into a red rag for the enraged Chinese bull? And it's all because of the tariff war that Washington declared on everyone, including China, except for Russia and its unfinished allies.
They will certainly be upset because we didn't indeed impose tariffs on anyone before, but now we will. The European Union is a tough, very tough trading partner. You think the European Union is indeed extremely friendly, but they are ripping us off. It's so sad.
The fact that the U.S. did not impose trade tariffs against Moscow can only be seen as an attempt to form some kind of alliance. American officials initially tried to justify themselves by saying that tariffs were not imposed because sanctions are already in place against Russia, and the trade turnover is very low, apparently even lower than with penguins on the Antarctic islands.
Donald Trump made one of the dumbest decisions he has ever made as president. He imposed tariffs on penguins, not Putin, because the tariff is levied on the herd, and McDonald Islands, where only penguins live. But he doesn't touch Russia. It's a disgrace. It's an absolute disgrace.
French journalists openly accused the U.S. administration of lying. They noted that the trade turnover of the states with Russia is greater than with Mauritius and Brunei. But tariffs have been imposed against these countries. And this means that the reason for the gesture of goodwill towards the aggressor lies elsewhere.
Think. Yes.
After this, the Americans honestly admitted that they did not impose tariffs against Russia because they are negotiating with them. The fact is that the states also seem to be negotiating peace with Ukraine, but tariffs against Kiev have been imposed, which clearly shows double standards. And China could not fail to notice this.
On behalf of President Putin, I spent 2 days in the United States. The reception was positive. There was a very frank conversation. I think our colleagues from the United States understand that it is necessary to restore dialogue with Russia, that Russia withstood the attempt at strategic defeat, that President Biden's administration tried to inflict and withstood it with dignity. It withstood successfully. And now, within the framework of dialogue, the United States is trying to understand where the points of intersection between U.S. interests and Russian interests lie.
Sanctions were lifted from Putin Dmitriev's personal wallet, and he was invited to Washington to discuss mutually beneficial relations. Meanwhile, Trump shouts every day about hostility with China and how he will strangle it with tariffs. And the U.S. Secretary of Defense even stated that America has no enemies except China. This is mentioned in a secret national defense document signed by the head of the Pentagon. As is already traditional for the new administration, everything secret immediately becomes public knowledge through the media.
Oh, how convenient.
It turns out that for the USA, the enemies are not Russia, not Iran, not North Korea, not ISIS, but exclusively China. And now officially, Beijing's main enemy is conducting open negotiations with Moscow, behind China's back. China will definitely respond to this. The only question is when and how.
Do you know that I can actually kill? Yes.
China can very quickly turn from a friend of Russia into its enemy. And a possible alliance between Trump and Putin is pushing it towards this. The president of the USA wants to detach Moscow from Beijing. That's why so many incentives and perks are being offered to Russians from America. And in response, Putin is ready to give Washington even his own natural resources, even those notorious rare earth metals. And this is a real stab in the back to the Chinese comrades. Because China is currently the largest producer of rare earth elements, and the USA is doing everything it can to strip it of its monopoly. If Putin allows Americans to develop his resources, it's a slap in the face to Xi Jinping.
Sagman, what's wrong with you? He's never done that before.
Experts also suggest that Russia and the USA might join forces to prevent China from entering the Arctic. They are reportedly considering the option of a northern trade route without Beijing's involvement.
What the USA wants, and the reason Dmitriev came to the United States, is to negotiate the development of this northern route, as well as the Arctic, and to prevent China from entering the Arctic. In my opinion, China is very concerned about this, and possibly that's why they flew to Moscow, to understand the current sentiments there. Because these talks that the USA and Russia are striving to keep China out of the Arctic are undoubtedly displeasing to China. They are relentless. China is concerned.
If this turns out to be true, China will have to punish the ungrateful vassal. First, Beijing lashes Moscow with economic whips. Russia is now completely dependent on China. They supply everything from there, from toilet paper rolls to components for ballistic missiles. Without Chinese imports, Russians would switch to lettuce pulled by donkeys, and Bass shoes would come back into fashion. There will also be no money to purchase everything necessary from other countries, because China is the main buyer of Russian oil, timber, and other minerals.
The People's Republic of China and its consumers are undoubtedly interested in the supply of Russian energy resources and, in general, raw materials from the Russian Federation. But the further it goes, the more conditions they impose. And these conditions are not always feasible for Russian companies.
But if the Trump-Putin alliance goes so far that the US starts saving the Russian economy and tries to replace China, Beijing will have no choice but to use its last argument: force.
What bothers China the most, in particular, in the relations between Russia and North Korea, is the existence of a border between Russia and North Korea, because China is actually not that far from this border. And if it specifically controlled the territory where this border is located, it would have access to the Bering Strait and the Arctic.
Moreover, Putin himself opened Pandora's box by starting the war against Ukraine and declaring to the whole world the right to reclaim so-called historical territories.
Vladimir, no Ukraine?
Yes, of course.
Yes, no Ukraine.
Then they asked to join the Moscow Tsardom, and that was it. They ended up being part of the Moscow Tsardom, and only later, after the October Revolution, various quasi-state formations began to emerge, and the Soviet power established Soviet Ukraine.
China has huge territorial claims against Russia, and they do not hide the fact that the Far East and part of Siberia are originally Chinese lands.
Robert Wu, the director of the analytical center The Big One Lab Advantage, turned out to be radical in his statements. From a historical point of view, Russia should return Vladivostok and the vast territory stolen over 100 years ago to us. In response, users from China suggested proposing this idea to Xi Jinping.
The Far East, Primorsky Krai, and the Amur region were Chinese as far back as the 19th century. Russia was able to seize them when China was weakened during the Opium War. The Muscovites forced the Chinese to sign unfavorable treaties for the transfer of lands.
What the Chinese called the century of humiliation. After the Opium Wars until Mao Zedong, 100 years passed, they called it the century of humiliation.
In the year 1900, in the city of Blagoveshchensk, people were massacred. The Chinese were hacked with axes, stabbed with bayonets, and the survivors were drowned in the Amur River. The next humiliation for China. On August 1st, the assault on Beijing began. The Russians stormed Beijing, crushed the Chinese army, defeated the Chinese patriots who defended China's capital, Beijing, and carried out a massacre there.
The Chinese have not forgotten this treachery and have not forgiven the national humiliation. And now Beijing and Moscow have switched places. Mordor is bleeding, its army and economy have been shattered against Ukraine. It's the perfect moment to restore historical justice.
China should reclaim its historical lands, annexed by Russia in the 19th century. The president of Taiwan made this proposal to the authorities of the PRC. On Taiwan attacks, President Lai stated, if PRC aims to restore unity and integrity of the country, they should claim Russia. This concerns the Primorsky Krai, part of the Khabarovsk Krai, and the Amur Oblast.
In Chinese school textbooks, the Far East is already referred to as lost territories. On the new Chinese maps, the cities of the Far East have been given back their historical Chinese names. Vladivostok is once again called Haishenwai, Blagoveshchensk is called Hailongpao, Khabarovsk is Boli, and Ussuriisk is Shuangchengzi.
The new geographical maps have been officially approved. On them, part of Russia's territory is recognized as the territory of the PRC itself. The Bolshoy-Ussuriiski island on the Amur is marked as Chinese territory there.
Perhaps China won't even need to use the army to take a piece from Russia, because it already effectively controls entire regions. Putin has leased millions of square kilometers of valuable territories in Buryatia, Krasnoyarsk Krai, Yakutia, and the Amur region to the Chinese for decades.
So, I am, well, from Novosibirsk myself. Even though there were no official protests shown on TV, it was reported that the land was leased to the Chinese for 50 years. In reality, there were rallies like everyone, well, were against it, yes. Nothing of this was shown on TV. When as if they came, the people went silent. And everything there, well...
You're witness intermediary?
Well, I participated there, I was there, I am a resident of this region.
Putin made a fatal mistake by trying to deprive Ukraine of its main ally and lure the US leadership to his side. He himself is losing his main support and backing. To avoid strengthening the US, Beijing can easily dismiss their potential partner. Moreover, this partner is on a short leash and is practically deprived of the ability to resist.
I would like to remind you that this video is created for entertainment purposes and contains elements of satire and irony. All facts and events are presented in a hyperbolized or exaggerated form to convey a comedic or dramatic effect. Our goal is not to mislead, but to highlight humor. Please take it with a smile.